In February of 2008, an F4 tornado with winds in excess of 200 miles an hour swept across Union University in Jackson. The tornado devastated the campus, leveling many buildings and structures, trapping students under piles of rubble. 51 students were taken to area hospitals with varying degrees of injuries. Miraculously, there were no fatalities. The miracles of that frightening day is the subject of God in the Whirlwind, a new book by Tim Ellsworth, the university's Director of News and Media Relations.
As I was hearing the stories, obviously I was seeing everything going on after the tornado, talking to people, hearing their stories, and the thoughts just kind of started kicking around. There needs to be a book about this. I mean, this is significant enough that these stories need to be told, and there needs to be some kind of a collection of the stories from students and other people about the events surrounding the tornado of February the 5th. There are 20 chapters. Each of them is pretty much a standalone story about somebody different and their account and their experiences through February 5th and the days afterwards. It's not a running chronicle of how the events unfolded here on campus. It's not an extensive, specific account of what happened. It's more of a series of snapshots of different people, and the majority of them are students. Their stories about, some of them are students who were trapped in the buildings that had collapsed. Some of them are students who had other experiences, had friends who were trapped and who were injured in various ways, things like that. Some of them are stories of faculty and staff and administrators here at the university. There's one chapter on the parents of David Wilson, who is one of the students who was seriously injured in the tornado, and his parents had to come from Chattanooga and journey all the way across the state that night, and not knowing what was going on with their son. And so it was their account of that. So it's a wide range. I tried to add enough variety to it to where there's not a sameness throughout. I tried to look for those stories that had a little bit of a different twist or a little bit of a different spin than other ones did.
I was in the Commons building, which is where the students hang out, with 6 other friends, just hanging out and playing ping pong and just spending time together, trying to wait for the tornado to pass. And then we ended up in the guys and girls bathrooms. There were 3 of us in one and 4 of us in the other, waiting for it to get over. And then all of a sudden it hit, and the electricity went out, and the walls collapsed and pushed us all onto the floor. It knocked me off my feet and had me in a bent over position with my legs tucked up under me. And we began to panic and scream and didn't know where we were, how deep we were, what was going on really. And then didn't really hear anything, didn't know what happened to the campus, didn't know if we were the only ones, didn't know if everyone was in trouble or what was going on. It had probably been 15, 20, 30 minutes before we heard people above us talking. We began to scream. A couple of guys got in touch with 911 actually. One guy got in touch with his dad for a few seconds before the phone called off. But we did have conversations with 911 more than once and told them where we were. So when they showed up on campus, they came to where we were. We began talking to the firefighters a little bit. All of us were pretty much, all 7 except for one was in better condition than the others, were all crushed with cement all on top of us. Both my legs, I lost feeling in my legs after about probably 30 minutes in. I was under there from when it hit at 7:02 until about 10:30. The first guy got out at about 9:30, I think, and the last guy was down there by himself for another hour. He was down there until about midnight.
One of the stories that stands out to me is the story of Danny Song, who was one of the students who was trapped in the Waters Commons. And in talking to Danny, it was really powerful to hear him relate the story. He was in the Commons, and it had actually been pinned to the ground by a couch. and couldn't get out. And then that couch ended up keeping this huge wall of concrete from collapsing on top of him, held the wall up. And what stands out about that story was him relaying the conversation between him and Matt Gay, who was one of the Jackson firemen who was working to free him. And Matt was kind of in this pocket with Danny, cutting all the debris, trying to get him loose. And Matt had cut pretty much everything that there was to cut except for one bundle of 2x4 boards. And he had some conversations with his captain. They were looking at it, and they thought that this one bundle of boards might have been what was holding up the rest of the wall, and they were kind of afraid to cut it. But it was across Danny's back, and he couldn't get out unless they cut it. And so they kind of dialogued back and forth and debated back and forth about whether they ought to cut it. And finally, Matt said to Danny, "I think we need to do this." And Danny said, "Let's do it." And so Matt fired up the chainsaw and started cutting through the bundle of 2x4 boards, knowing that if that was indeed the support that was holding this wall up, it was going to crash on both him and Danny and probably kill both of them. But he cut the boards, and the wall held, and they were able to pull Danny out and pull him to safety. My experience was I got here and saw cars and people running around. I got up to the women's housing complex and saw the buildings that had been collapsed, and saw students running around, digging through rubble, trying to get their friends out. Saw people carrying women out who had been trapped in the buildings. And just saw I remember seeing the lights of the ambulances and the fire trucks. It's amazing to me how quickly the Jackson Fire Department got here and began rescuing these students.
The book includes 16 pages of photos taken by Union University photographer Morris Abernathy.
The vehicles that were just thrown all over campus, thrown up against buildings, laying upside down on their side. It's like you would take a bucket of Hot Wheels cars and just reach in with both hands and just throw them out. That's kind of what it looked like on campus.
As news of the tornado and its destruction began making its way to the public, individuals and organizations offered assistance and support. These walls hold a mere fraction of the cards, letters, and notes received by Union. The common theme through all is the faith and miracles that accompanied the wind.
The main purpose that I want to see accomplished with this book is I want people to recognize the providence of God and the mercy of God in His actions that night of February the 5th. This is a book about the faith of the people here at Union through the tornado and through very trying circumstances. And for those who were here and have seen the pictures after the storm, to see the damage, the only logical conclusion that you can come to is that God was protecting our students that night. I don't think it's possible to think that this was just an accident, that nobody died. And you see these buildings just lying in ruins, just heaps and heaps of rubble, and yet everywhere there was a student, there was a little pocket that students were safely protected in. And so I want to communicate through this book that we serve a great God who cared for our students that night, and He deserves the credit and the praise for that.
I think it really changed our campus as a whole, brought us together as a body and as a community. The Lord has really blessed this on our campus and the student body, that it's just really been amazing to see how much the Lord's in control.
My own faith in the Lord was bolstered through writing this and talking to these students and hearing them testify of God's goodness. And I think to myself, I don't know that I would respond that way if I was in those kind of circumstances. I'd like to think that I would, but I don't know that for a fact. And yet here I'm listening to stories of people who were this close to dying. And that was another theme that kind of emerged through this, was everybody that I talked to, it seemed like, had a story about how they were spared by just inches. They were huddled in the bathtub and they had their heads bent down, and a 2x4 came in and shot right across their heads, this far above them. Others who, remember walking into a room and the building, the room that they just left, collapsed on top of, of where they just were. People who were running out of collapsing buildings and jumping to safety and making it just by mere inches. And so it was remarkable to hear these stories.
Before the end of that February, construction crews were busy putting the university back together. Several residence buildings should be ready for students by fall semester.
We still have great financial needs here. The total cost from everything after insurance comes out and all that, we're looking at it being in the hole of around $18 million. And so far we have received about $10 million in gifts, which is great, but we still have a long way to go.
God in the Whirlwind is available at Lifeway Christian Store and its website, as well as Amazon.com. All proceeds go to the Union University Disaster Relief Fund.